What are your thoughts on voter ID?
Should be a necessary act in order to vote because it proves that you're a citizen of the country.
I work the polls. We're not allowed to ask people for ID, but they can show it.
I don't think it's proper to discriminate against people.
Whether it's the country or the state, whatever role or position you're voting for.
What do you mean by disenfranchised?
Nefarious actors are trying to bend the rules about it.
People who can't find their birth certificate or just don't have a way to do it.
I hate going to the DMV or the MVC to get the IDs.
If you have other identification, like license, anything.
Those states that are saying this are saying that, hey, it marginalizes groups of people as well as making it difficult for older people to vote. What do you say to that? Hey guys, my name's Alessi. Welcome back. If you've been here before, thank you for tuning in. If you're new here, this is a documentary lifestyle channel with a focus on telling the stories of real people. In today's video, as you can tell by the graph right here, it is focused on the subject of voter identification. It is one of the most disputed things in the United States, as you can tell by the graph. Many states have it so you do not have to have a voter identification. Some states make it a requirement, and then there's a gray zone. So today I went to Jersey City to find out what people believe. So if you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe. If you truly want to stay informed, give me that subscribe button, and I will see you in the video. What are your thoughts on voter ID?
Voter ID?
Yes.
Can you explain to me exactly what that is?
Voter ID being showing identification before you vote.
Oh. I think that voting should be compulsory in this country. That's the first thing. But I also think that showing ID should be a necessary act in order to vote because it proves that you're a citizen of the country. But I don't think your voting result should be recorded against your ID, is what I'm saying.
Got it. And why do you believe that you should show an ID?
Because I just think it should be compulsory, and everyone should vote. And if you don't vote, similar to the country that we're from in Australia, is you get fined.
You get fined. What are your thoughts?
On voter ID?
Yeah.
You have to be able to identify. You have to prove that you're entitled to vote.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise anybody could come along and just
skew a result.
Abuse the scenario. I could vote here, and then I could go 5 kilometres down the road, vote again, and then vote again, and then vote again. That should be illegal.
Do you think it's dangerous, reckless, no voter ID, or how would you describe it in a word?
It's irresponsible.
Irresponsible. And you?
Yeah, I think so as well. And that's also just how I grew up, just knowing that once I turned 18, I had the right to vote, and I wanted to fulfill that right, and it was the law.
What are your thoughts on voter ID?
I think it is not something that I support because it can be used for voter suppression. Unfortunately, I work the polls, and we're not allowed to ask people for ID, but they can show it. So you can show your card, your ID, and scan it, which is nice, and then it pulls up your info. But I work with the homeless, and I know that, and just the homeless and hungry, and I know a lot of people don't have ID or the process. I know a girl in New York who's got to get her state ID renewed, and it's a freaking nightmare, and she has no money. So I don't think it should be a requirement.
And you say that because you notice a lot of homeless, you're saying, the difficulty. And how much would you say, or how would you describe it? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I think it creates difficulty not just for homeless people, but for people who don't have time to spend a whole day, going to get ID. I mean, getting ID is much harder than you think, right? So they don't have the time or the wherewithal or the knowledge about how to go up and stand in line, and then you have to have the 18 points of ID, and what if you don't, if you don't have a bill in your name. And so they should make having ID much easier, but we don't. If we had a national ID that was issued to people easily, then I would support it. But I think that, given that we have other safeguards in place, like, if somebody votes in my name, it's going to come up twice, and they're going to compare the signatures, and they're going to figure it out. So I'm not really worried about voter fraud. I don't think that really happens.
So then how do you account? Because some people say that how are you going to be able to account for the people that go in with no voter ID?
That's everybody now. Almost, nobody does vote with voter ID. It's against the law to ask them, right? So Yeah, so it's against the law to ask somebody for ID when you're working the polls. They come in, they tell you their name, and then you verify their address. You can say, can you tell me your address? It's in the book or it's on the computer. And then they get a slip, they sign it. And in the old days, that would be for signature verification with the old books. Now it's all online. But the point is that it is an automated system, you know, so then all of the votes get counted. And again, if there are duplicates or if there are, you know, sometimes people will send in a vote and they'll forget and then they'll come and vote again. It's caught. That's what the whole system is for, you know, so.
Do you believe it could possibly lead to fraud? Like, is there any way for fraud to happen with this system with no voter ID?
I don't think, no, I really don't. I mean, I think that, again, if you look nationwide or something, there could be people who do the wrong things. And historically, that's not necessarily the people who are being suppressed for lack of voter ID, right? They're people who are going around and voting, you know, because they have some political interest. They're cheaters, you know. Most people are just trying to get out and vote. And again, it's a right, and it's something that we don't make easy enough. And again, if there was a national ID easily gotten, but how do you have a social security card on you? How do you get your social security card? How do you get a copy of your birth certificate? You have to go to the town. You want to get your state ID, you got to get your birth certificate. I'm born in South Carolina. I have to go to South Carolina to get my birth certificate, unless I'm computer savvy and have credit cards so that I can then, you know, take these 22 steps to get ID. I mean, it's really, really difficult. I mean, I dread when I have to renew my driver's license, you know, and I have money and resources and I'm computer literate, and it sucks, you know.
And what base of the population, when you say they're having a hard time, is it mostly the elderly? Who exactly?
I think it would be, I mean, young people now, I think registration and all of that with smartphones has really, really increased. But again, you register and you're not showing ID when you register online, right? So it has to be, but this is how we've done it forever. And I do not believe the reports of voter fraud. I mean, this is Jersey City. I know, having lived here for 30 years, that people laughed about how vote early and vote often, right? And they were white working people. They weren't black people. They weren't, you know, it was funny. They thought it was funny. And there are people who cheat everywhere, but I just don't think that it has any impact on the actual election results.
So not enough
faith in them.
Not enough voter fraud, you think, would take, if there was voter fraud that was taking place, there wouldn't be enough to take an impact. If there's a question, it's going to be discarded. Let's put it that way, right? So if there's 10 of my votes and they're all for my candidate or one's for the other candidate, they're going to be like, they are supposed to even reach out and contact me. If they can't, then they're going to discard the vote. It's not going to be verifiable. Yeah, so and oh, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Just my ignorance of this. How would it go with somebody, let's say they use the same address, but they put a different name and they use an address where it's like, all right, I'm going to use this address, put my name underneath it. Is that possible that they could vote under that? Because it wouldn't be the same person.
So if you come and you say to me, my name's Bob Smith and I live at 39 Erie Street and I'm a Democrat, and I look it up on, now it's all computerized. So I used to open the book and find the person. And then I would say, oh, Bob, it'll tell me what district you're in and everything. And I'll say, you know what, I have a different address for you. Not the one you just told me, 39 year. And they'll say, oh yeah, I moved in October and I didn't change it. And you're like, okay, fine. Because they're going to vote, they're going to sign that document. The signature is there. Like if we were all sitting around doing a signature comparison, but again, we sign everything on iPads now. But the point is that they're coming, they're presenting themselves to me, we're having an exchange. And, you know, at that point, some people will be like, I can show ID. And I'm like, I don't ask you for ID. It's not necessary. Now, if that guy votes and then he's got a different address now, right? Because he hasn't updated it. And then if somebody else comes and says, I'm the same person at that address, well, then we have a conflict, right?
What are your thoughts on voter ID?
What do you mean voter ID? What do you need to vote?
Yes.
I think it's acceptable.
Do you feel like it's necessary? It's not needed?
I think you have to have some form of ID.
Photo ID? What type of ID would you
It's
say?
like a license or a photo ID.
And what do you say to the people that don't believe you need a voter ID, that you can just show up and vote? That's not necessary per se.
I don't. I mean, how do you validate whether that individual is authorized to vote? I mean, is there I'm assuming that you have to have there's some rules about who's allowed to vote and who's not allowed to vote, right? So I think that if you have an ID identifying who you are, then you should be able to vote.
And would you say that's important? It's vital? What would you say?
I think it's important, but it's not vital.
Why would it not be vital?
I think it may hinder some people from voting. It may hinder some people from voting that may have legitimate reasons for not having the proper identification.
And those people you still believe they didn't have the proper identification should still be able to vote?
I think so. Yes.
Under which circumstances, then, if someone comes in, they don't have the ID, who are you thinking about in that case?
I'm not thinking of any specific type of person or individual person. I think everybody should be given the same rights as everybody should have the same rights for voting.
Whether they have an ID or not.
Yes. But again, there's a question of whether if the rules are that you have to be a citizen to vote, then you should be able to have some ID identifying that you're a citizen, but depending on what the rules are.
Yeah, what if you're a non-citizen and you say you forgot your ID?
I wouldn't know what, I don't know what they would do today. Would they allow that person to vote today?
Not if they don't need voter ID, right?
That's true.
That's if it is.
Yeah. But then how do you prevent individuals that really should not be voting to vote? I mean, are you assuming everybody that's physically here should vote? What if they're just visiting, doing a visiting here or stopping here on a trip to another country? Maybe it's a citizen of another country. I don't know what the rules are, to be honest with you. I don't think it's proper to discriminate against people for voting.
How would they discriminate for voting if they didn't have a voter ID?
Well, I'm just saying, if there's a rule that you need it, then you should need it. If there's no hard rule, then they shouldn't be required.
So if there's no rule that says if you don't need any ID to vote, you're okay with that?
Yes, if there's no rule, yes.
What are your thoughts on voter ID?
I do think it's important that you present some form of identification when you are voting. Otherwise, whether it's the country or the state, whatever rule or position you're voting for, it's susceptible to fraud, where someone can come in with at multiple times and vote over and over and over again, where it's really one person, one vote.
What do you say to people that feel that voter ID, it can discriminate other groups of people and discriminate just from people from being able to vote because they can't vote?
That's just presenting some sort of paper in order to have that power to vote. So I guess it's all about, are you saying what about the folks that don't even have that identification?
Exactly.
To be able to vote?
Yeah, they say they show up and they don't have an ID. Should they be allowed to vote or should they not be allowed to vote?
I think they should. I mean, I think in those instances, especially if they are a part of a community, there should be some sort of alternative document you can provide. I do think that, because everyone has a say. So I'm a Canadian, I'm not an American. So I've been here for, I want to say 7 years, but I've never had the right to vote in this country. But there are some things that, living here or living in New York, where I would like my voice to be heard. Having lived here, I feel like it does count. But, I I'm not, the law doesn't allow it, but I think there should be some sort of alternative for at least that voice to be heard.
What are your thoughts on voter ID?
They should have some. Yeah.
Why?
Because you need ID to do basically anything, to get a license, whatever, so why not just verify who you are as a voter?
Some states like California, even here in New Jersey, say that you don't need voter ID, that you can go and vote, and that if you forget your ID per se, or whatever the situation may be, they can validate other ways. Do you feel that's a safe system? Do you think that can lead to fraud? What are your thoughts on that?
I think you should verify who you are if you're going to vote. I think that's kind of fair.
What are your thoughts on voter ID?
I think that, it's necessary to identify whoever is voting, but I think a lot of people like to abuse it to try to disenfranchise people. So it's a kind of a slippery slope, but I don't know if there's a solution to it, but
what do you mean by disenfranchise?
I think essentially some nefarious actors are trying to bend the rules about it, to make it a little too strict for some people who in most cases would be able to vote and are legal citizens. Maybe they don't have a certain form of identification or something like that. I feel like, I don't know how to put it, but
when you say bend the rules, nefarious actors here, are you referring to just having the ID, or are you saying being able to show an ID when you vote? What do you mean by that?
I think, I guess in my case, I'm talking about like, having the ID in some scenarios. I'm also not like super well versed in this, so this is more of like me parroting what I hear in the news sort of thing.
Okay.
The truth is I don't have a strong opinion about it.
What's it? You don't have a strong opinion about it. So do you believe, though, in this country, if you show up to the poll, how should people be able to be identified, or should they be identified when they go vote? Or
I think they should. Just mainly because, again, like, you want to make sure who someone says they are when they go vote. And you don't want double dipping into voting. So
what do you think about the places that ban voter ID, that says you don't even need to have an ID to go vote?
That's a little extreme for me. I think having some form of identification makes sense, but
why would it be extreme?
Probably because, again, I feel like it has more to do with you being able to, again, say who you are, and when you vote, you should be able to vote one time. So if you're saying that there's no identification needed, there's kind of no rules around that, in my opinion.
And that can lead to fraud, is that what you're saying?
Like, theoretically, I think it like definitely gets blown out of proportion in the news and by certain people. I don't think it happens that often, but that can happen.
What are your thoughts
Yes.
on voter ID?
I would say as long as people have access to the ID to get the voter ID, that's fine. But I wouldn't want to stop people who can't find their birth certificate or just don't have a way to do it. I think the more people that vote, the better.
Well, aren't you afraid at any point that that could possibly lead to fraud?
Not really. Very little.
Why very little? What makes you say that?
I think that the idea of fraud I believe the idea of fraud in elections is way overblown.
Well, just in general, being that if someone were to vote, how would they be able to identify themselves?
Well, in general, once they would still have to register in one way or another. And in Jersey City, certainly, you always get a card that tells you, that identifies you. So actually, when I go to vote, I show them, this is my card, shows where I live. That was sent to me in the mail by the Board of Elections. So.
And you don't believe that that could lead to any level of fraud on a scale that could change anything?
I personally don't. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people do, but I personally don't.
What are your thoughts on voter ID?
I think if we're going to make people have to require to bring their IDs, that we make it easy for them to get their IDs. Right now, like everyone, right? I hate going to the the DMV or the MVC to get the IDs and all the paperwork. So just make it easy on people to get the IDs, and let's do it.
And in terms of people validating their vote that they are a citizen, they're from here, what are your thoughts on that? Should they show an ID? Should they not show an ID?
I think until we can make it easy for people to get IDs, that we should be making it easier for people to vote.
And how do we account for people that don't have an ID or forget their ID? Differencing between someone who maybe isn't from here versus someone who forgot their ID. How do we account for that and make sure that doesn't slip through the cracks?
Well, if we have the law on what it takes to vote, then that should be it. Whether ID is required or not, whatever the law is, we just follow it.
And then when people show up to the polls and let's say they don't have an ID, what should happen?
Well, if an ID is required or not required, then that'll dictate what happens.
But how do you feel about that?
Huh?
What do you think about that personally on your level?
I think the issue of voter fraud is way out of hand in terms of the rate of fraud is almost non-existent. So I think it's more of a political point than an actual issue.
And how do you draw that conclusion?
Just look at how many people have been arrested for fraud, right? Like how many cases have been brought. There's like the one that I know of, right, in like North or South Carolina, where the Republican committed fraud, and yet somehow he seems to get away with it. So.
But in terms of just overall, you don't believe voter fraud is an issue?
I don't think it's an issue. I think the fact that there are thousands of different municipalities doing their own thing, it's very hard to commit a fraud at such a wide scale that no one can catch.
What are your thoughts on voter ID, sir?
Voter ID? Oh, if someone have a ID, it's good, but if you have other identification, like license, anything should prove that's him.
And if they don't have anything to prove that's them, do you feel like that's an issue or no?
Yeah, that could be a little issue, yes. But long he can show where he live, his address. That should be okay. If you live right here, you're in the city, I live so and so and so, and then you can check this is where he live. He live there, and then he's qualified to vote. He should vote. Yes.
But in just terms of ID, like if let's say you don't have a license, and I just have maybe a card that has my name on it with an address.
No,
like what level of identification should be required to vote?
Public service, PSCNG, that's where you live, you pay bill there, that should help too.
What are your thoughts on voter ID?
I don't know. I think that it's fine. I vote by mail, so.
And in terms of when people go to the ballot box to verify identification that they're a citizen, do you believe that's important? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they should be a citizen if they're voting. I don't know if I have strong opinions on the form of identification.
But do you believe there should be identification?
Yes. I do.
What are your thoughts on voter ID?
Everyone need ID.
Why?
It's going to show you who you are, and ID tells everything.
Where
you come from, where you came from, and how people, because there's a lot of scammers out here using ID. Because I was scammed one time too. Someone was as going as me.
What do you think of states that say you don't need voter ID?
Yes, you need an ID. You need a voter ID. Everybody needs an ID. Because anybody can vote 3 or 4 times the same person. That's why it's important to have an ID.
But what if those states that are saying this are saying that, hey, it marginalizes groups of people as well as making it difficult for older people to vote? What do you say to that?
No. Everybody needs ID.
Yeah. Even though those marginalized groups of people they're saying are black people that are not able to have IDs, what do you say to those people?
They should be able to still vote. If they have a birth certificate, why not? If you have proof of address, you should be able to, I mean, ID is important, but, most people feel that, they don't need it. But you need ID. That's who you are. That tells you about yourself.
And you say to those people that say that, oh, they're not able to get an ID. They struggle to get it, and it's too hard. What do you
It's
say?
not hard. It's easy. They have all these places around that you can buy ID. All you need is $10. You can go to any campus place and they'll do ID for you. You can be as anybody. And that's a lot of them don't be scamming.
You can't tell them. You can't give them your opinion.
Look, the matter of fact, it was one of his brothers too that walking around without the ID.
All right. What are your thoughts on voter ID?
Voter ID, I think it's a good thing, right? For the voter IDs, what you mean by like?
Do you think it's important to have an ID when you go and vote?
Yes.
What do you say to the states and people that say you don't need a voter ID?
I think then, how can we know who you are?
Do you think that could be dangerous? Do you think that's reckless? How would you describe that if we don't have any voter ID?
Probably be reckless, really. And I think it'd be like typically dangerous too, because everybody votes do count, and you want to really know that the people that's supposed to be voting vote and had a purpose to vote.
What do you say to the people that say that the people who don't want voter ID is because there's marginalized groups of people that can't get an ID, that struggle to get an ID, that older people, it's too difficult, lines are too long, that they don't need an ID? What do you say to those people?
Well, I think the people, that's sad that, the people that can't get the ID, that want to vote, that have the ID. But I'm thinking that everybody should have the rights to vote, and everybody should be able to have ID to vote, so we, verify who you are, and so, every vote counts.
So you'd say it's essential that there needs to be an ID?
Yes.
It's not rare for somebody to come and say, I moved and I never updated my registration. That's stuff. If it's around Jersey City, it's not like you're coming from Florida.
Yeah.
Like I moved from Monmouth Street down to Grand, and so that's my new address. And so then we say to them, please go online and update your information.
Yeah.
And we let them vote so long as they sign the docket. And as I said, if somebody else comes and then says, I'm that person with the old address that's in there, well, then I've got a duplicate, right?
What if they say they're a relative? How does that work?
You cannot vote. You have to represent yourself as the person. So
even if you mail in?
I believe so. Even if, you sign something that says I am, like, you can't be like, oh, I gotta bring these guys apart. You sign a document that says I will not. You want to get the that I am the actual person. So
perfect.
And you're supposed to, and this is where some of the crazy people will stand around when they have the ballot boxes, where you can drop them off in person in front of City Hall, and it says you must be the person dropping it off. So legally, I shouldn't go there with my son and mine and my husband and drop them all in there.
But you could do it.
Checked? I could, but they're separate ballots and they're all signed. These are the ones where people are dropping them, right? They're all signed, and then they have to be verified. Particularly, those where there's no interaction. I think they have more of a verification process. So they're opening them, they're tallying them, they're checking them against the existing records, and they're checking to see if there's any duplication of this mail-in vote and any other type of voting, and then the voting commission is responsible to try and reach out and resolve those conflicts very quickly, actually, because you're supposed to have the results, and they do.
How does that work?
I don't work for the Board of Elections. I think it's a good idea for you to interview them, and they're very helpful. But again, there's a huge process of having to process these computerized records, which are now greatly improved. But we have paper records, right? Because somebody comes in, and even someone can come in and say, I'm John Smith, and I'm like, John, you're at the wrong polling place, right? And if it's like an hour before closing and they go, I can't get to my polling place because I'm here at McNair School and I'm supposed to be over at Base Gym, then I can give them a provisional ballot, and then they fill it out and they say, I'm filling this out as a provisional ballot because I couldn't get to my polling place before And again, they fill it out, and on that, they swear that they are them. You know, when you fill out the personal thing, you're like, my name is Jennifer Meyer, and I sign it. And I have my, and there's a lot of information.
And it's fair to say, based off that system, you believe it's very unlikely that fraud could happen that way.
I don't believe that fraud that could impact outcomes. Again, nothing is perfect. I work in computers. There's always an error somewhere, but I do not believe in our system that, that there's any type of fraud like that.